Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. And welcome to this edition of the Henry Report. Now joining us is James Henry. He's a leading economist, attorney, and investigative journalist. Thanks so much for being with us, James.
Good to be with you.
James, so many updates concerning the Panama Papers. We've had the Prime Minister of Iceland actually resign because of revelations of his offshore accounts. But we aren't really hearing too much about American corporations or American politicians. Why aren't there so many U.S. names?
Well, one reason is that Americans don't have to go to Panama to hide money. They have Delaware and a bunch of other states that don't have that basically have financial secrecy. There's no declaration of beneficial ownership for a Delaware trust or a company. And so when Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian law firm, was asked, the Mossack was asked where he holds his money, he said, well, Delaware. There's 900,000 companies in Delaware, and nobody knows who owns them. So that's one answer. I think another is we don't have kleptocrats, thank goodness. A lot of the edge of this story is not democracies like Iceland, but you've seen lots of people in dictatorships around the planet who have availed themselves of this conduit in Panama. And basically, they're just buying companies from Mossack Fonseca, which, when I first knew them, had a small shop back in the 1980s. Now they're, at that point, the British Virgin Islands had sold about 3,000 companies offshore as of 1985. Today, they've sold more than 1 million, and Mossack accounted for about 100,000 of those. But that means there's a great big provider industry. Mossack is only one of these companies. So, it's not really the case that they're the fourth largest in the world. I mean, there are many others. In the Turks and Caicos, for example, you find a local service provider that's specialized in setting up shell companies there. So each one of the 91 havens in the world has its own specialized law firms. And they're order takers. Basically, they're taking orders from the biggest banks and law firms and accounting firms all over the planet who are doing this stuff on the, for their wealthy clients.
All right, let's talk about the source of the hack. Mossack Fonseca says it was a hack. What do you make of that?
I think they're trying to possibly deflect attention from the real source, which may well be a whistleblower internally. We don't know. There's been a whole line of attack on the Panama Papers, emanating ultimately from people like Putin and from China, which basically banned any mention of this scandal in China because so many people close to the president have been implicated in having these companies. But their line is, this is a U.S. intelligence agency operation of some kind that was designed to get at Putin and his inner circle. I mean, I think that's just nonsense. We've seen so many other people, like the president of the Ukraine, who is no friend of Putin, is also implicated in this story. So, it's pretty neutral politically. Across borders, we've seen people of all different shades, from Marie Le Pen in France on the right, and the president of Argentina on the right, new President Macri with offshore accounts, to Lula in Brazil. I mean, president of Brazil former president of Brazil owning a house that was purchased through a Mossack Fonseca company.
Gotcha. James, you made mention that Mossack Fonseca is not just one bad apple here, that there's really a network. Can you just speak about that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, they didn't send retail lawyers to call on President Putin to get him to channel his cronies' business to them, nor do they send, when they're recruiting people like Lionel Messi as clients or David Cameron's father, they were, referred by a whole network of international law firms, banks, and accounting firms and trust companies that are basically, channeling business, knowing that Mossack Fonseca is a edgy firm that will ask no questions. This is a global network, a haven industry that spans borders. And so that's what we're up against. It's really not just one bad apple in Panama. It's literally dozens. We know that Mossack's accounted for 100,000 of the BVI's companies, but there's still 900,000 more that have been provided by other service providers. So, there are plenty of rogues in this gallery.
So where is this all headed? I mean, we have President Obama who is calling Congress to close tax loopholes. What are the policy implications of these Panama Papers?
I think it's waking elected officials up in some cases. We've seen Bernie Sanders talk running for office and making a big issue about Panama in the last couple of days as he wades into the New York primary. We've seen Obama finally do something constructive here, really to be welcomed. His move to stop this huge corporate inversion that was going to cost U.S. Treasury about $35 billion a year just by virtue of Pfizer allowing itself to be acquired by a company based in Ireland, which is a tax haven. I think he's also going to bring attention to the individual side of this as more and more revelations come out about the U.S. I don't think we've seen the end of the story about the U.S. clients of this bank, or the big banks all over the world that have been, so far we've identified at least 15,000 companies that were channeled from 500 banks, including major players in the global haven banking industry like UBS, Credit Suisse, HSBC, a giant UK bank. Now, these are the same institutions that caused the financial crisis in 2008. Many of them involved in the developing debt crisis in the 1980s. They were bailed out after the financial crisis in 2008. And here they are over in this corner of their behavior, helping the world's wealthiest and many of the most corrupt politicians, conceal their wealth offshore. So, I think we're getting enough critical mass across countries to actually be able to have the world community stand up and say, tax havens have to end.
Tax havens have to end. Great final words there, James. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're quite welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.